we're going to talk a little bit about Afghanistan. Recently in the news, there was the release of information that there's been like, what, 66 deaths in Afghanistan, the worst month yet, and maybe even worse than the month before. And this is at the same time that President Obama is supposed to be starting to implement an exit strategy within the next few months, 6 months or whatever. I forget the exact time scale. But we're going to have an interview with Zaher Wahab, who works a couple, 3-4 months a year in Afghanistan, is native Afghanistan, I should say, with the Ministry of Education. He comes back and is good enough to honor us to come on this program and talk about what he sees. And what he sees is pretty much the same every year in a lot of ways, because things aren't changing. This winning the hearts and minds of the people, along with the military failure, we're also failing to do that, and maybe the two are connected. So we can explore that tonight. But welcome to the program, Zaher.
Thank you, Jim, for having me. And I was going to say, we have been meeting like this for 9 years now,
9
talking
years?
about the
Oh my God, I didn't realize it was that many years.
We're approaching the 9th anniversary, October 7th, and we have been talking about this occupation and this enormous waste of lives, of resources, and moral capital and all that, and this inflicting pain and suffering on the Afghans and many Americans. You pointed out this last July, 66 Americans were killed in Afghanistan and quite a few injured, and more than 276 Afghan civilians were killed in 1 month.
Do they have
and
those
many more?
Do they have those figures for the civilians so that they get it right now, or
there are estimates, of course, as we found out from the WikiLeaks. There's quite a bit of misrepresentation about the whole situation in Afghanistan. Someone was commenting that the whole war, the whole operation, is sort of a lie and a secret. So. But that gives you an idea. For example, we're now spending, the United States is now spending $8 billion a month on that operation. And we're losing about 2.5 soldiers per day. And we're destroying countless Afghan lives and villages and homes and canals and so forth. So this is a disaster for both countries.
For both countries. And, you know, just to bring this into perspective, I was watching Jon Stewart the other night, and he went on a big rant about how the Republicans in Congress stepped up, and in order not to go further into debt, they refused to put, was it $30 billion into a fund for those who were damaged at the 9/11 ground zero.
That's right.
Well, just what, 4 times the amount you're talking about.
Yes.
And they do that every month.
Well, there's talk about the deficit now. Yes.
Right.
So far, the United States has spent $300 billion in Afghanistan, and we continue to spend $8 billion a month. And the NATO countries, there are 48 countries fighting in Afghanistan. So a gang of 48 countries ganging up on this one poor, least developed country in the world. You know, this is, it's unbelievable, you know, that this can go on, and it's unbelievable how indifferent so many Americans are regarding this war and this occupation. And it's getting worse by the day, by the hour.
You say that all these 48 countries are ganging up on the country of Afghanistan, but they're not even really ganging up on the country. They're ganging up on factions within the country.
Well,
it isn't like the whole country has got an army and they're going up against
That's
these.
right. It's difficult. Well, and this is one of the frustrations that the U.S. NATO troops have, and they say you can't tell the civilians from the combatants. And they have talked when they invaded the Marja, you know, the little town and villages in February in Kandahar, and everywhere elsewhere in the country, because Afghanistan is a very heterogeneous society, and there isn't, when it comes to the insurgency and the general population, they look the same, they dress the same, they have beards, they have turbans, you know, and their features are more or less the same. So it's very difficult. The person who's standing next to you could be an insurgent, or who could just be an ordinary person. So, but the point is that because there's such a heavy use of these drones and predators and nighttime raids, but also the foreigners don't quite understand the nuances, you know, the differences. So there's a lot of what is called collateral damage. At night you can't tell, and they have the wrong reports. For example, someone gives them a wrong intelligence that there are too many people in this house or in this compound, when that can be a wedding, it could be a wake, it could be a picnic, it could be a funeral. But you look at numbers and you drop bombs or you raid these places in the middle of the night. It's dark and it's very hard. So that's why they think at least 25,000 civilian Afghans have been killed in the last 9 years, other than the combatants.
And I think also the insurgents or Al-Qaeda or whoever might take a couple pop shots at the U.S. soldiers near that wedding. So the soldiers may end up opening up on that wedding. To provoke them to open up on the wedding. So.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point. Yes, because it's a war. I mean, when you occupy a people's country, their homes, their mosques, their schools, their land, their property, expect resistance. And so there's either provocation or there's simply a resistance all over the country. But you mentioned something very interesting, Al-Qaeda and Taliban. I think, Washington, like Jim Jones and Mike Mullen and Robert Gates and all these people are on record saying that there may be between 50 and 100 Qaeda in Afghanistan.
That's all?
Because they have moved to Pakistan and now they've moved to Yemen, Somalia, and other places. This is, they are in the CIA, for example, that there are very few Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And then they estimate that maybe there are between 28 and 30,000 Taliban resistance fighters. So on the other hand, you have 130,000 U.S. NATO troops and another 100,000 civilian contractors by American contracts, the mercenary armies.
That's where a lot of our money is going.
A lot of the money, yes. Yeah. And you have about 100 to 200,000 Afghan militias called the Afghan National Army and the police. So in other words, you have almost 400,000 soldiers with the most modern arms you can imagine, fighting 30,000 Taliban with primitive weapons. There's something wrong with this picture. So I think one thing we need, well, I mean, maybe we should contract our own security to Taliban. They'll be much cheaper. But there's something wrong. And what's wrong is that it's not just the 30,000, Talibs that are resisting, but they have the support of the entire population almost. At this point, I just returned, June 11. And I talk to people, I hear conversations, I see things and so forth. Even people, Afghans, regardless of their ethnicity and region, religion, language, etc., in their politics, people genuinely are fed up with the occupation. They want the Americans and the NATO out. They don't necessarily all like the Taliban, but they say, we will settle things amongst ourselves, but you need to leave. That's where things are. To confuse, Taliban with Qaeda or the Afghan Taliban with the Pakistani Taliban, it's not a very good analysis, because the Taliban, we have to remind our viewers that the Afghans had nothing to do with 9/11. Somebody created by the CIA came and raided Afghanistan, and from there they planned maybe and attacked the 9/11. But the Afghans themselves have had nothing to do with 9/11. And the Taliban keep saying, we have nothing against America, the American people, or the American government. We just want our country to be free and be left alone. And that's the crux of the matter.
So, it occurred to me that Taliban word gets thrown around. What exactly is it? A particular sub-religious sect of Islam?
No, Talib is an Arabic word. Talib is the singular, Taliban plural. Talib is seeker of knowledge. And now, because in countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and in fact in most Muslim countries, the governments have not been able to provide modern universal education to all of their people. So a lot of, but on the other hand, you have mosques in every village, every little town, every block, everywhere, and the mosque has an imam or mullah or a priest. And part of his duties are also, and it's always a male, duties are to teach not only Quranic religious subjects, but also reading, writing, arithmetic. I spent, when I was a child, before I entered school, I spent countless hours and days in the mosque being taught by the imam, for example. And then when I began school, I kept going to keep learning the 3 R's, but also religious rituals and this and that. So Talib are people who study with them full time, and their Talib means seeker of knowledge of religious, studies and so forth, full time. But now it's a generic term, so everyone is a Talib now. And now it's because the Afghan situation is so complicated. There are gangsters involved, there are thieves, there are smugglers, there are mafias, there's the land mafia, the drug mafia, the weapons mafia, there are foreigners, there are insiders, and there are the genuine resistance movement against occupation. So it's all very, very complicated. And everyone now calls themselves Talib, because it's a useful term. And for the foreigners who don't quite understand the nuances of the situation and the complexity of the situation, they just lump everybody together. Mm-hmm. So if you bombed my house in the middle of the night, and I try to resist, because in Afghanistan almost every house has some kind of a weapon, and if I bomb your house or kill your relatives and so forth, you would probably resist. And then they're quickly labeled as the Talibs. They're resisting Talibs, and you go after them.
Mm-hmm. Is our government conducting themselves in their efforts over there with the knowledge of what you're speaking about the nuances and all that? Are they aware of that, or are they just,
well, they're not willing. I mean, it's clear that not only the occupation, the war has been lost. I think that's really the consensus now. The Dutch just pulled out. The Canadians and the Polish are going to pull out next year. The talk in Washington from the president to, the ordinary soldier is that the war is not winnable. And we have to find a political, diplomatic solution to it. To do that, you need to work on diplomacy and negotiations, but also to work on winning hearts and minds. But you don't win hearts and minds by beating people up and bombing them, raiding them and menacing them. And they're losing. That's why, as I said, 30,000 insurgents could not resist an army of, say, 500,000 people unless they had the public support. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's as simple as that. So, but there is a lot of talk. I think there's a lot of talk, and there have been talks going on, and there was a conference in Kabul last month, and then there was one in London. The talk now is to negotiate with the Taliban. But, Washington, I think Obama is also, since he made this his own war, mistakenly, when the talk he gave at, I think at the military academy last December, he made him, so he's committed now, and he will have to find a sort of an honorable way to extricate himself from this fiasco, so that he's not blamed for you losing Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that's going to be difficult to do. I mean, George Bush went in there and just supposedly destroyed the Taliban, and they were gone, and now they're back. They were coming back when George Bush was in office as well, but now if he goes in there as the President of the United States and negotiates with them on a somewhat of an equal level, it's not going to make him look very good.
No. And the Taliban, actually, they were never quite destroyed or kicked out. I mean, people just changed, they dropped their weapons and melded with the population. That's, I mean, the Taliban and the population, especially the Pashtun population, are interchangeable. And there are, more than half of the population of some 30 million Afghans are Pashtuns, mostly in the south and east and some in the west, but they're all over the country. So the population is very, very mixed, and in October, late to 2001, when the Americans invaded, with support of the Northern Alliance, the Taliban just disappeared, and mixed with the population, and then slowly came back. And I think we need to point out that the fatal mistake was to invade the country in October 2001. The anger, and here was understandable after 9/11, and it was a revenge attack. But what was happening before that, we need to remind our viewers that there was a civil war going on in Afghanistan between the North and the South. The Pashtuns on the one hand, who were then called the Taliban, and the Northern Alliance, on the other hand, made up of Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Hazaras, and so forth. And the Taliban had pretty much conquered the entire territory except a little area of the northeast. This is the time when 9/11 happened, then the United States intervenes on behalf of the Northern Alliance. And that's, it sort of marginalized the Pashtun majority, and the Northern Alliance moved into Kabul in December 2001. and occupied, you know, the ministries, the government posts, etc.
And is that who is now the prime minister and all that? Is the
No,
folks?
Karzai himself, of course, President Karzai is a Pashtun, but he's a nominal Pashtun. He's a Pashtun who was acceptable to the Northern Alliance. After the war in October 2001, there was a major conference in Bonn convened by the UN, US, and the European Union, and they decided on the form of the government. Another mistake that many people now point out, with the big mistake in that conference was to exclude the Taliban entirely, as if they had been eliminated.
Because it wasn't the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
So they came back, you know, with a vengeance. So mistakes were made then to, one, intervene in a civil war, which was raging. In this civil war, I can assure you that unless something is done between the different groups, this will re-emerge. You know, there will be a resurgent civil war when there are no foreigners. And the other mistake, of course, was to, in the famous Bonn conference where there was talk about the formation of an interim government and the president, the ministers, all of these were decided, there was no Taliban representation. And so now they're making their presence known.
I see. You know, while you're talking, among all of our failures, the one that really strikes me the most is Ralph Nader was in town not too long ago, and he was talking about how not only have we failed to stop the opium and the heroin trade, is that we're actually guarding shipments and providing assistance for this to continue.
Well,
can you...
Here is another problem, you know. I mean, Bush in his last days of the president's last months, in fact, rewarded the Taliban regime with $40 million because they had almost eliminated poppy growing. And now, last year, Afghanistan produced about 7,000 tons of poppies, which is turned into heroin. So the country now produces 90% of the world's heroin. And a lot of it is processed in the country, which, among other things, it means is that now there are between 1.5 and 2 million Afghan addicts, to drug addicts, children, women, men, etc., etc. And two, that it has become the main economy. It's about a third of the GDP in the country. You know, domestically it's worth about $5 billion. In the international market, God knows, it could be worth $100 billion.
It's kind of like opium in China
but
in the last century.
It has now penetrated all levels of the government, and many foreigners, including people who say the U.S. military, elements within the U.S. military. You know, and if you can remember Central America, remember in the Golden Triangle in the Southeast Asia, this would not be the first time where the CIA and elements of the military would be involved in drug smuggling and so forth. But what they're doing now is, because NATO and the Americans need the help of these warlords and drug lords to either provide them safe passages or to, in fact, provide guard security for there are dozens and dozens of military outposts way out there. In some places in America, there may be just 20 Americans. And they can't protect themselves, so they subcontract with these local strongmen and warlords and drug lords to protect them. So in other words, the Americans work very closely with the drug dealers and drug growers, not the little farmer who is in debt anyway, but with the drug lords, and so they turn the other way. Every now and then they will say we're going after the big guys, but the big guys are very close to the cabinet. They're in the government. They're the high level of government. So it has become a very difficult problem, and there's, as I said, the Americans have not been serious about eliminating the drug menace.
And it just shows us to be hypocritical and a failure, because I remember us going in there, one of the major reasons, ways that was sold to the American people was we were going to liberate the women and we were going to do away with the poppy trade, you know, on top of the other
and bring
issues.
Development and democracy and all that.
Right.
Well, the women, you know, I think women, our viewers who are interested in reading about this, should read RAWA, which is the acronym for the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan.
Right, yeah.
They have an excellent webpage, and they can tell, these are leftist women, and they can tell you what they think about the occupation, the Taliban, the warlords, and so forth. But also people should read Malala Yousafzai's book, A Woman Amongst Warlords, the young parliamentarian woman who was kicked out. What is happening to the women, certainly certain women have been, quote, liberated. You know, there are more women now at the universities and schools and in workplaces and so forth. But the vast majority of the women, their conditions have in fact deteriorated. For one, because there's a lot of crime against women in the cities, and two, if you keep, killing the men, the husbands, the brothers, the fathers, the men, who provide for living in a country like Afghanistan where the women cannot leave the house. In fact, the conditions of women have been worsened for the majority of the women than improved. The drug thing, as I said, this has become a very serious problem, and I don't know how it can be ended with the support, because the Americans and the NATO are not interested, because they depend on the goodwill of the drug lords and the warlords and the smugglers.
It seems like such a losing battle. And one of the other statistics that I forget, that you've mentioned it every time you've come on, is the billions of dollars. Would you say 20 billion a month, wherever we're
8 billion.
8 billion we're spending over there.
Yeah.
We're talking about winning the hearts and minds of the people, but we're spending $8 billion towards the military. And how much are we spending towards schools and infrastructure? I mean, it's not very much, is it?
Not very much, and what is spent is leaving the country very fast. So, for example, the American ambassador, I was sitting maybe 5 feet away from him, Carl Ankerberry, this last March, said that the United States has spent $700 million on education from 2002 to this moment. $700 million on
it's $100 million a year.
But $300 billion on the military operation. Some money is being spent on, other kinds of providing goods and services. People would say maybe 15 billion or so altogether, foreign assistance. But the way it's done is that only 20% of the foreign assistance that comes from wherever, Japan, the United States, Canada, Australia, 20% of that assistance is channeled through the Afghan government. 80% of that money is spent by internationals, the NGOs, the UN, the non-governmental organizations, and so forth, because they don't trust the Afghan government. And you should see the salaries and fringe benefits and perks of these NGO people. There are literally thousands and thousands of internationals, expatriates from all over the world, doing all kinds of things and paid enormous amounts of money. So money is coming in, but money is also leaving. The other thing that has been now is common knowledge, about $10 million leave officially cash through the Afghan National Airport, the Kabul International Airport, taken out by corrupt Afghan officials. And so there are now 2 or 3 major FBI and U.S. Justice Department and Treasury Department offices, teams to try to control capital flight from the country by corrupt officials. The upshot of it is that, even though maybe in the last 9 or so years, maybe 15 to $16 billion have come in, but most of that has left the country. And the work that is done is shoddy work. It doesn't last. Buildings fall apart, things go bad, or they're stolen, or they're burned and away. So and that's why I think the thing is that for most Afghans, there's no payoff. They say, where are those promises that were made to us? Peace, prosperity, democracy, a clean government and all that. Where are they? They would say, where are the hospitals, the schools, the food production, etc., the security, the peace of mind? There's very little to show for, and so most people really have no affinity with the government. They have no respect for the Afghan government. They don't trust the government because the government has not done anything for them, and they see no reason why they should defend a government that has done nothing but, on top of that, last year the UN did a study. $2.5 billion are given in bribes. Last year, for example, the Afghans together gave $2.5 billion in bribes to corrupt government officials. That doesn't endear you with the population.
No, I've always wondered, you say that so many $1 billion is spent on the armies and all that, and then a small fraction of that is spent on building up the infrastructure. I didn't understand why after 7 or 8 years there's still no schools, which we'll get to in a minute, and they still don't have water, they still don't have electricity. So what's happened, the reason why they don't have all that isn't because we're spending the money on the armies, it's because it's being frittered away through corruption.
By internationals and by government officials, yes. But also money is misspent, because most internationals can't leave their compounds in the capital or in the provincial cities. So the U.S. government would say subcontract the project with some American company, of course. An American company would subcontract with some Turkish company. A Turkish company would subcontract with, say, an Indian company. The Indians will do the work, but they will hire Afghan labor. So you have several levels of contracting, and everyone has to make a profit, 20% or whatever it is. So that's one thing. And so very little money actually reaches the target, whether it was a school or a clinic or a storage facility or whatever it was. And so by the time it gets there, the work is done very poorly because, again, internationals are just not safe. They can't move. They can't go and spend time on the project, you know, and supervise it and so forth. So it's done by non-specialists, you know. That's one thing.
And with so many middlemen, there's no accountability.
Right. There's no accountability because, you know, and there's no clean record keeping. There's no accountability, you know. There's no responsibility. And so money is misspent. It's stolen, you know, and that's why there's very little, and these enormous, you know, wages and benefits of the international workers. There are people who pay. I mean, you can be a Blackwater person paid $1,000 a day for being a security guard, or $500 a day, plus all of your expenses. That's a lot of money, and we have more than 100,000 these contractors, mercenaries. About a third of them are American.
And so these mercenaries are from all over the world then.
They're from South Africa, from Chile, from Nepal, from you name it. The company will be either American or British mostly, or mostly British American. So for example, the company that was in charge of our security, the project, was a Texan company.
And so soldiers, or whatever you want to call them, the people that are in there making
guards, yeah,
100,000, you know.
Oh, easily.
They're making a fortune. But there's also a company that we're going through, the Pentagon is going through to hire them.
Yes.
And so they're also getting paid big money. So it isn't just the people that are on the in location doing the job. It's the company. It's a company they work for.
And you know, Blackwater, which is being investigated and prosecuted because of the crime they committed in Iraq,
so
and
they had to change their name.
So forth. But they just renewed their contracts. You know, there are several DynCorp. They do all kinds of things. I mean, it's not just they provide, for example, security guards for the U.S. Embassy or the USID people. They provide the security guards for when important armaments are being carried. They actually load and unload these drones, you know. And some of them apparently even operate to control the drones. So they're a part of the, you know, they're part of the military apparatus. You think? I wonder if she.
I was thinking we have some pictures, and you know, we've talked a lot about the general dynamics of the situation, but you're on the ground there in a very particular way, working for the Minister of Education,
Higher Education.
Higher Education.
Yes.
And so you're have you had any? Been able to have any effect over there? We can just kind of talk about that as we go through the pictures here.
These are some glimpses of, you know, how Kabul is being trashed. You know, there was very little garbage in the past, but now you see heaps and heaps of garbage because there's no real regular garbage collection in a city of 5 million people.
5 million people,
yes,
that many?
Kabul, which was really meant for 500,000 people.
That's, you know, that's twice as big as this whole state.
Yes. So now we have about 500,000 people, and this is a street. I pass by this every day. You see the trash and the kids playing in it, going through it to see if they can find food
glean
or
something, yes.
Yes. So this same, again, it's another street. So you have a city of 5 million people wouldn't, maybe where 12-13% have indoor plumbing and running water. The city has no sewer system. It has no real garbage collection, you know, and only about 20% of the roads are paved. And most structures are, they're outhouses or septic tanks or things like that. And so the air in Kabul is hundreds of times worse than the normal quality of the air that you have.
It must be really dusty.
Very dusty and very muddy, and its dust is mixed with stuff. You know, there's a big lawsuit now by, these are internally displaced people. So you see the contrast, the nice house behind them, but these people have lived here for more than 10 years. And these are people who were displaced by the fighting they keep moving. You know, if there's fighting in Kandahar, they will go here, then they will go someplace else. This is how a lot of streets look like. And a lot of this is plastics and styrofoam, things that you hardly ever saw in Afghanistan. But now the garbage there has become like garbage here. Because there is a class of people who have a lot of money, and they consume a lot of foreign stuff, packaging and wrapping and things like that.
Right.
So that's what we're seeing here. I mean, we're wrecking an environment. This is a school. So this is a school in Jalalabad, for example, where it may be 115 degrees now outside. And that's a school. You can see the children sitting on the floor trying to find shade, and the only thing they have is that little board, if you can see it by the tree. So the country, for example, can spend about $30 per year per child, K through 12th. That's
$30 a year?
Yes, you can
imagine.
imagine.
Buy pencils in this country.
Well, this country, our average is $10,000. So here we provide our children with $10,000 per year per child education. There, they can only spend about $30. At the university level, it's less than $100 per year.
And I forget how much we spend to keep somebody in prison here.
Oh, 65,000.
65,000,
yes.
yeah. So
yes.
Just to
well,
give
we
you
have built prisons too there too. I mean, they built a very fancy prison. So you see, the other thing here is that Afghanistan, 60% of the population, 60, are under 20. So this is a very young country. And yet, half of the children, school-age children, are not going to school because there is no school. The other half who are going to school, 30% of them were girls. The other half who are going to school, school may mean 2.5 to 3 hours a day and maybe 7 months of the year. That's it. Because it's cold, it's hot, the teacher's not there, teachers are not qualified, there's no place. The 6 million children who do go to school, K through 12, only half of those schools have a facility, a building. The rest of them are out in the open. So these kids are waiting for classes.
Out in the open.
And in the open where, as I said, you know, it's in many places now it's more than 100 degrees.
Well, I know if you're really hot and if
this is the inside of a schoolroom, a class, and you know, people have tried to fix the wall and things.
Well, you know, it seems to me that if you're really warm and you're not got full stomach and, you know, your relatives
if you're sick,
you know,
if you're frightened,
2.5 hours isn't going to do you much good.
No. Well, that's why, you know, I mean, this is the future. And, you know, unless we fix this, so you can see this, you know, it's open school. There's no cover.
There's walls, but no roof.
The walls are also, there's wall, but also it's plastic. And you will see, I think maybe in the next picture, you will see people studying in tents. Tents, very flimsy tents, you know, that don't insulate.
But it does break you from some shade anyway.
Here.
There you go.
Yeah, so this is a fancy tent school. It's a school about 30 miles from Kabul.
Now these were all.
This is interesting. You know, this was again in Jalalabad. This was almost the only source of water, a hand pump, for about 4,000 students, K through 12 students, all day long. Many schools operate 2, 3, or 4 shifts in the cities because the government can't afford, and we are not building schools. So this is children's lives again. Another.
So these are all just like what would be called grammar school children here.
Yes, grammar school, you know, or just street children. And
so I don't know if we should be called that, but are these young children learning to read and write?
Actually, quite a few of them would graduate illiterate, you know, from 6th grade. And also they can't be absorbed. So, for example, so many children would begin 1st grade. Quite a few of them drop out of school before 6th grade and then before 9th grade. This is an English class. And then before 12th grade. And then, for example, last year about 100,000 high school graduates took the university entrance exam. Only 40,000 were absorbed. About 60,000 of them, there's nothing for them. So imagine these young men and women finish school with all kinds of hopes and ideas and aspirations, but there's no school for them. And there's no work, there's no future, there's no hope. What are they supposed to do? This is another classroom.
And this must be
this is actually
a higher education school.
It's a part of a park. It's an entrance to the only park in Kabul. These are like You see the mountains.
Is this from the city of Kabul?
Yeah, Kabul is kind of surrounded by hills and mountains. It's a very mountainous country, you know, very high mountains in many parts of the country.
Well, that's what.
So this is a school too.
Mm-hmm.
So you see flies, you know, mosquitoes, bugs. That there's nothing on the floor. So in the winter time, when it's wet, it will be muddy, and when it's not, it's dusty. And as I said, that tent it just provides the shade, but no warmth or no cooling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is a girls' school.
This must be on the outskirts of Kabul
yes,
somewhere.
Yes, it's on the outskirts. But all girls have uniform like this. School girls have to wear a uniform to distinguish them from other people.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, large classes, there could be anywhere from 50 to 100 students in a class. Under qualified teachers or unqualified teachers, very few textbooks. This is another classroom, you know.
So is that script there? Is that the Afghan language or
yes,
Arabic or
yes.
It is Afghan
no, this
language.
is Farsi.
Farsi.
Yeah.
So that's Persian then.
Yes. This is a school. You know, this is a school. You can see the little part of the board, the writing board on the wall. It was wrecked, and you know they haven't gotten around to fix. There's no money. You know, so there are no windows, you know, and that's the ceiling, and there's nothing on the floor, and that's the wall with bullet holes. I mean, imagine looking at that all day long if you're a kid, and the kind of worldview you'll be getting from the message the world is sending you. Well, people going to school or going about life, you know, life is very hard. Life is very, very hard.
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be.
No, no, because the country itself is very rich in resources, and you know, the international community has a moral obligation to rebuild. You see this all over Kabul. You know, buildings half destroyed, but so upstairs, downstairs, people have businesses. You know, you can see little stores and shops and this and that, or a tea stall, and upstairs people live, and you can see that a lot of them don't have windows, and the building could collapse any time.
That might be all of the photographs there.
Yeah, yes.
You know, what struck, there we go, we've got, oh, I guess we'll work on that anyway. But you know, what struck me is, I think it's in Iraq that we've built an enormous base there. But I know that we've got 600 bases around, I think it's 600 or 900 bases around the world.
700 plus, yes.
And we're building, I'm sure we're building some bases there, but I didn't see one building there being built for the people. But I know that we have PXs and we have, you know, our own restaurants.
Bases and prisons. Well, in Afghanistan, there are at least there are dozens. They really think that there are maybe hundreds, 200 or so, what some of them are called forward operation bases, FOBs.
Right.
So in some bases, there's an outpost there in some part of the country with maybe 15 people or 50 people or a contingent of 100 people. Some of them are huge, like Bagram is now like a city. You know, it has more than 30,000 people living there. In Bagram also, they built this very big prison. Americans spent $65 million, which is taking some of the people from Guantanamo and putting them in Bagram, or from Bagram to Guantanamo. There are also other prisons being operated throughout the country by the Americans. Kandahar is a huge base. You know, it's one of the biggest military bases, more than 30,000 people. And then there's one in Shindan. What they're saying, what people think, that this fighting terrorism and fighting the Taliban and modernizing, developing Afghanistan, that these are really simple excuses and rationales and alibi for the real American agenda, which is to maintain presence in that part of the world. If you look at it, it's too bad we don't have a map, but Afghanistan is very strategically located. It connects the Central Asian countries, which are sitting on oceans of oil and gas and so forth.
Natural gas, yeah.
Natural gas and oil. Connect Central Asia with the subcontinent, South Asia, India, Pakistan in particular. In fact, just this last 2 or 3 days, the foreign minister or the energy ministers of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, and India were working on finalizing what is called the TAPI, T-A-P-I, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. So many people believe that the United States will maintain a permanent presence in Afghanistan because Afghanistan itself is very rich, especially in uraniums. You know, recently we heard lithium, uranium.
Right, they knew about that all
this and that.
along.
Yes,
but,
yes,
yeah.
but it was interesting because that was announced by General Petraeus, why it should come from him. But the idea is to build pipeline, because even during the Clinton administration in the Taliban, they were negotiating this pipeline from Turkmenistan through western Afghanistan, through port of Gwadar in Pakistan, and then on to India and so forth. And now they're working on several options. So it's to secure the pipelines, but also to deny, you know, access to especially China, India, and Russia and Iran to this very strategically located Afghanistan. The Americans want to keep them away, you know. So the purpose is more like geopolitical, strategic, and energy than really fighting terrorism. As I said, you know, there are no Al-Qaeda in Taliban. There are maybe 50 to 100, and they couldn't possibly threaten the United States. But also, I think terrorism, you know, should be treated as a crime. And not as terrorists. Terrorists are not a government. They're not a country. They're not an army. They don't have an air force. I mean, they're a bunch of criminals who probably would attack the United States if they could, but you just treat it as a crime, and you work with the Interpol, you know, and other agencies, intercept them and capture them before they move. But to attack and invade and occupy a country for 9 years and keep spending $8 billion a week, this country that had nothing to do with that, this is madness.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a method to their madness. You know, this might be cynical, but listening to you talk there, it would be in an unscrupulous government's best interest not to educate the people, not to give them autonomy, not to give them the ability to have a decent democracy, because those would be going against your needs to be in control.
Yes, yes.
So they don't really want to win the hearts and the minds of the people. They just want to appear to be.
And, you know, although General McChrystal used to say he wanted to minimize civilian casualties, but he was the one who was in charge of the special forces. So the war is now shifting, you know, because I think the United States and its allies really want to get out as quickly and as honorably as possible, but they don't want to abandon. So the emphasis now is on special forces and these drones. Special forces are operating in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, and they will, you know, they have lists of people that they either capture or kill. You know,
and anybody that happens to be around them.
It's too bad. You're unlucky. And so a lot of innocent people do get killed and maimed. And that's alienating the population. So I think that's the new strategy. And yes, you're right. I remember, you know, Jim, as a child, people loved America and Americans. I mean, when I was a child, all I wanted to do was come to America. So here I am. And now when I go there, I don't tell people that I have an American passport. That's how much things have changed. And you're right. You know, just think what you could do with that, just $8 billion. The expenses of 1 month or 1 year. This is a small country, and we could build it. We could build its education, you know, its healthcare, its agriculture, its communications, its roads, its security, you know, its government apparatus, its law enforcement. We could provide for people, and then they will be happy and there will be no trouble. And we don't have to fight them.
Well, all we really have to do is educate them and give them the bare necessities of life, and they could do the rest themselves in a generation.
Yes. People are bright.
They wouldn't need us.
Yes, train them, you know, train them for self-help, you know. But the help that so far has arrived. So now the military is also doing a lot of, quote, rebuilding and reconstruction. But the military is not trained to be the Peace Corps, you know. The military is a military. They were trained to kill and fight. But also what they've done is that they've done a lot of damage, and this was Secretary Rumsfeld when he established these what he called provincial reconstruction teams. And these are teams of maybe anywhere from 20 to 100 people. The real purpose of most of them are military. The provincial reconstruction team, and I think there are 24 of them in Afghanistan. Most of them are managed by the United States. The majority of the members are military. And then some of them are intelligence, and some of them are maybe professionals you like, maybe agriculture or whatever, education, and 1 or 2 State Department people. Rumsfeld came up with this idea to win hearts and minds. All of the NGOs objected to that and said, don't do this, because when you mix the military with reconstruction and rebuilding, it endangers all of us foreigners, because the average Afghan can't tell if you work for the military, the CIA, the State Department, or if you're an expert in growing walnuts, you know. So, and that's what has become. So the average Afghan
broke down those definitions.
Well, you profile the Afghans, profile the foreigners profile the Afghans. They're mutual enemies, and there's misunderstanding because they don't know each other. And the average Afghan can't distinguish between this and that, what you're there for. And so now, as I said earlier, you know, all of the foreigners, they're petrified. I mean, they're 24-hour, you know, guards. You can't even go across the street without armed guards, and you can't travel. Well, I was not allowed to go in an ordinary car, even an SUV, driven by our people. We had to travel in armored SUVs. And these armored SUVs are terribly expensive, you know. And they're recognizable too, because you can tell them from outside. So that's how bad things are.
So all those pictures and things that you were taking, a lot of that was from these SUVs and...
Well, I have ways of getting out.
But you can get out.
I had ways.
You can blend in.
I can blend in, you know, and I had ways to just free myself sometimes, so I could get a sense of what's happening, you know. What are people saying? What do the side streets look like, you know, the stores, the merchants, the barber, you know, and so I would find ways to go, and usually, although increasingly I must say, because Kabul is like a garrison city. I mean, it's occupied, it's the mother of all occupied cities. There are checkpoints, Afghan checkpoints, foreign checkpoints, armed guards, armed soldiers, foreign soldiers, NATO soldiers, American soldiers, and you can see them. They have their fingers on the trigger, just like this. So
like Palestine sounds like.
Some of them are outside, some of them you can see them through their windows and so forth. But increasingly, and because of the suicide bombings and the mutual distrust and mutual hostility, I used to be able to take pictures even sometimes of these forces actually, and now I don't take my camera out when they're nearby because I could be misunderstood.
Yeah, you might spook them,
I'll be gone. I'll be gone in a second. You know, a lot of people like that were killed, you know, mistakenly. So, but I find ways, as I said, you know, to talk to the people to sort of get a sense of what people are going through.
Well, you know, it's wonderful that you can bring these stories back with you because, you know, CNN and MSNBC, they do their exposés, and, you know, as far as it goes, they do all right, but I don't see how any of them getting into really giving us a feeling of what's going on like you have been doing.
Unless you're embedded, and if you're embedded, you know, then you give the party line.
Right, exactly.
You know, that's why the Rolling Stone magazine article was so, you know, he brought down our general, McChrystal.
Let the light out.
That's right. Or that's why Washington is so upset about the WikiLeaks, because it exposed the whole farce, the lies, the criminal, the crime, you know, the waste.
It's a phony edifice.
Distortion. That's right. So, I mean, I wish we had more good, independent, honest journalists. Like I was just reading something by Ann Jones, an American woman who does very good writing, you know. The Nation magazine sometimes will do something with the Coburns, Alexander Coburn.
And Amy Goodman.
Amy Goodman, of course, and Christian Parenti. Anand Gopal. I mean, there are people like that. But if people are interested in knowing, I used to write dispatches to Lewis and Clark College when I was in Kabul.
Right, yes, I remember reading some of those.
People are welcome to go to Lewis and Clark College webpage, faculty webpage, and look at the log.
So yeah, that would be
from
go to Lewis and Clark and click on the faculty page, and then they can find your name in there.
Faculty logs, yes.
Right.
Yes. But the point is that, I mean, this has been going on for 9 years, you know. So many lives
and no
have
end
been
in
wasted.
sight.
Young men, young women, people with hopes and aspirations, children, you know, and $300 billion. We could build the whole continent with that $300 billion and people would be happy forever.
Forever.
I mean, just 10% of that money would build Afghanistan. There's still time. And I just can't understand why people are so indifferent here, so complacent, so I don't know what the problem is. Although increasingly you can tell the polls show the majority of the Americans don't think it's winnable. You know, about half think it's not worth it. And, you know, that many think that we should withdraw. And in Congress, you know, I mean, increasingly there are people in the Senate and in the House who really would like a timeline and a timetable. The Russ Feingold and McGovern bill, you know, and in the Congress too. So
Kucinich
the Kucinich. I mean, there are people, but I think Ralph Nader was saying that what we need to do is massive numbers of Americans to protest in the streets and say, you know, this shouldn't go on. It's not. This is not good. You know, this is criminal. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. It's unwarranted. You know, the Afghans had nothing to do with this, and they have nothing against America. And why are you tying them with the Qaeda and other Taliban and international terrorism? This is just not right. And you know, and we have needs here. I mean, we're cutting school days and school weeks. We're cutting school teachers' positions. We're closing libraries. You know, more of our people are on food stamps, you know, than ever. More of our people are unemployed and underemployed. We are in a depression here, and we're wasting, you know, tons of money over there.
And a lot of that's because of the burden of the money, the treasure we're spending over there.
Well, if you don't raise taxes, you know, and if you don't do this and that, the money has to come from someplace. So you're taking it from the needs, you know, education, healthcare, transportation, the environment, you know, this and that, and wasting it on. But it is enriching somebody. So it's not like
people, right?
Yes,
that's a good point to go into.
Know, I mean, so and that's why I mean there are whole careers built. Like now, it used to be Eisenhower warned us against the military-industrial complex. Now, as you and I said, you know, we have a military, industrial, academic, congressional media complex. So there are literally millions of people. You know, there are careers involved. There's you know, glamour, you know, there's money, there's prestige, there are profits to be made, you know, there's image involved, you know. So it's become too complicated. I mean, in other words, war has now become an integral part, as Andrew Basevich say, and it's become part of our way of life. It's part of our thinking, our language, our culture, our economy, our foreign policy, and it's a strange way to conduct foreign policy, you know, through the barrel of the gun. And it's a stupid way to, you know, either be developing or modernizing or liberating people through the use of drones, you know, and special forces in the middle of the night. It's like people need to wake up.
It's like operating with a pitchfork or an axe or something.
Yes,
it's not very precise. And you know, I know you were saying the economy of it. There's probably not a state in the union that doesn't have some kind of factory or some kind of installation that is not preparing some kind of munitions
armament,
or something, armaments for this war. And you know, the congressman or the senator from that state or that location is going to make sure that stays in there. And you know, on a subterranean level below it, that's the roots of all this, it seems like to me. From the economic end of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that, you know, I mean, you know, this economic system requires resources and expansion, which requires a military, which requires war. So, you know, the economic system, empire, imperialism, the military, and war are integrated. They're interconnected. So if we didn't have enemy, I think we would be looking for enemies and inventing them and creating them.
Well, we did with terrorism.
Yes, yes, it was it was a convenient replacement for communism. And before that, remember, you and I may remember Euro-communism at one point. Remember Euro-communism, where they thought Western Europe was going communist. But the point is that, you know, that money, people can make money if that's what they want by investing here. You know, invest money here and produce workers so they can go buy your stuff. Or why don't you trade with people? I mean, instead of occupying other places for their oil or gas or uranium or lithium or whatever, just do normal trade with them like other countries do, you know?
Well, once you go down the road we've gone down, it's almost impossible to get off of it, it seems like. And just like we've gone down the road of the dependence upon petroleum, which those two are very connected.
Yes, yes, but I mean, people have to think, because I mean, we also need to understand that this way of life and this standard of living is not sustainable in the long run. And that a country with 5% of the population cannot continue to insist on using the world's 40% of the world's resources. 5%, 40%, and so forth. And then if you look at the OECD countries, 20% of the world's population using up 80% of the world's resources, but also creating 80% of the emission. the carbon dioxide and so forth. I mean, I think people are beginning to be aware. Schools should do this. The media should do this. People should talk about these issues, Is this right? Is this ethical? Is this sensible? Is this sustainable? Would other people allow us to enjoy this good life forever, Do other people have rights? Is there justice, Is there a place for justice, for ethics, for compassion, for other people's rights to be what they are, to arrange their lives in their, governments and economies and institutions? And is there any kind of moral human obligation that we should help instead of damage people, harm people all the time?
Well, part of you said, why are we doing this? Why do everybody's so apathetic? I was going to say, there's a 5-letter word called media. The media does not talk about these issues. Right. So people, they're busy, they have their lives. They don't necessarily automatically go into these dynamics. And if the media doesn't bring it up, and it isn't brought up at work, they're not going to think about it. They're not going to realize that the dynamic of the footprint we're leaving on the earth in order to be able to buy that bottle of water or that latte or drive to the mountains or whatever. Not that those are in themselves evil, but in order to us to have this, other people have nothing or have less.
That's right.
I think is what you're talking about. And we're down to about a couple minutes, and they sometimes actually take us out a little bit early, so we may just go off the air abruptly. But was wanting to open up the phones, but this conversation was so engrossing, and we haven't even completely touched
there's lots to talk about.
The subject.
There's lots to talk about this issue of conversion. The military and civilians trying to convert Afghans. There were several cases. This is very bad because it really pits Christianity against Islam, invading people's cultures, introducing a drug culture, alcohol, prostitution and all that. We're doing a lot of collateral damage too, other than just killing people and destroying, but we're doing other damage. And I'm really convinced that in the long run, we're hurting our own national interests, our own national security, by acting so arrogantly and so criminally and so viciously. So I think all of us, educators, media people, the culture industry, family conversations should really be talking about these issues, what is right, what's wrong, what's ethical, what's unethical, what's moral, what's immoral, what's legal, what's illegal, and how people should relate to each other. We all have this one planet. Why can't we just get along, as the Rodney King said, Why can't we just get along?
Well, because there's really no one answer for that, and
I think there's hope. I really think.
I was going to ask you that. You come back every year, but you come back with hope.
Yes, we have to be hopeful, and there's hope against hope. And I think if this country would not fix itself, it would be fixed from outside. Americans need to know this. Other people are not stupid.
That's what 9/11 was about.
Supporting. Yes, there is hostility, and so what as Basevich said, we need to learn how to deal with this Muslim world, 1.5 billion people. Don't lump them all as terrorists. They're people. They have struggles. They want to reconcile modernity with Islam and religion. We just need to help them a little or leave them alone.
Right. We're gonna have to leave it there. I think that we're down to, we might even be off the air right now. I don't know, but thank you very much, Zaher.
Thank you.
It was wonderful,
thank you.
We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're not going to have a show next week. Thanks for tuning in.